On a Friday morning in mid-January, under a sky that threatened heat, I set off for the Holhoek guest farm, a remote patch of wilderness in the Free State. It had been 5 years since I last walked these trails, and I was eager to return. Holhoek is a place that stays with you, not just for its rugged beauty, but for the way it forces you to navigate it. The trails here are punctuated with ladders bolted to rock faces, swaying bridges stretched over gorges, and crossings that make you question your balance and your nerves. The drive to Holhoek had been unhurried, punctuated with stops to stretch, to sip coffee, and to take in the vast, unbroken landscape. By the time we reached the gate, the afternoon had settled into its golden hour, the land sprawling before us, patient, waiting. At 7 in the morning, the air was already thick with heat, the kind that seeps into your skin before you've even begun to sweat. The first stretch took us through Creek Drive, a cleverly designed path that snaked alongside a narrow stream and a donga, its edges crumbling from years of erosion. Bridges, some sturdy, some questionable, crisscrossed the stream. Someone, long ago, must have had a great time building them, assembling crossings out of whatever was at hand. As we walked, the donga deepened into a gorge, at least 25 meters down in some places, its sides worn smooth by water that had long since disappeared. Further along, the path passed a small waterfall, just a trickle now, but enough to remind us that water, given time, cuts through anything. A strange sign stood in the distance, a wheelchair accessible symbol, someone's idea of a joke, surely. The thought of a wheelchair navigating these cliffs and ladders was beyond imagination. The trail began to climb. The first ladder appeared, bolted into the rock, the first of many. The views opened up, stretching wide across the Free State. Here and there, the path skimmed the edge of sheer drops, but the builders had been thoughtful. There were always handholds, chains or beams to grip, plenty of safety measures for the cautious. Some took these sections slowly, calculating each step, while others moved like mountain goats, seemingly unfazed by the void beside them. trail never lingers long on the same terrain, never settles into monotony. Just as you find a rhythm, it throws something new at you. A sudden turn, a narrow passage, a climb that demands both hands and feet. Now and then, the path vanishes into the rock itself, forcing us to squeeze through crevices or duck under low-hanging ledges. It's the kind of trail that keeps you engaged, not just with your legs, but with your wits. Every twist feels deliberate, as if the landscape itself is toying with us, settling little challenges just to see if you're paying attention. And we were. There was no chance of boredom. The trail twisted through narrow rock passages, forcing us to scramble, to duck, to squeeze through gaps carved by time. At Table View, we paused. The sun was climbing, the heat pressed against us, the air thick and still. Further on, we reached Sandstone village, a place of endless steps, beams and precarious support structures. An architectural marvel, if you like that sort of thing. Then came Fair Falls, Witneck Cave and the ruins of old stone huts, their ochre-colored plaster blending into the cliffs. The landscape, though, never loses its magic. No matter how many times I've been here, the wide, open vistas never fail to impress. A little further along, we caught sight of red hartebeest moving through the grass, their curved horns tilting forward like kites. A few springbok grazed nearby, heads lifting sharply at the slightest movement. The trail tilted upward, leading us toward Witnek Cave, but not before demanding some effort, steps, bridges and ladders. An impressive feat of engineering, recent repairs evident in the sturdy planks and freshly bolted rungs. It all looked solid, though the true test would come only if something gave way. No one voiced any doubts. We climbed, gripping wood and metal, watching the valley drop away below us. By midday, we reached the cave, a broad, shaded overhang, cool even in the mounting heat. We dropped our packs, stretched our legs, and ate in comfortable silence. On the rock walls, faint traces of ancient art still clung to the stone. Red orchid figures, stylized animals, ghosts of another time. Further on, we arrived at the Bushman Cave, where two small sand huts sat tucked under an overhang. These 200-year-old relics are from a time when clans fled into the mountains to escape the wars below. The trail wound through yet another cave, this one boasting a tiny waterfall and some flat rocks arranged into makeshift tables and chairs. And then more wheelchair signs, either an inside joke or a very optimistic interpretation of accessibility. As we were nearing Rory's Rock, we spotted two zebras grazing in the valleys below. Rory's Rock itself offered a spectacular 360-degree view of the land stretching away in dusty shades of gold and green. Then came Ruins View, where we could just make out the crumbling remains of an old farmhouse. By now, it was past 2 in the afternoon. A series of steep descents, ladders and rocky steps led us down. The last stretch was an easy walk back to the camp. It had been a long, hot, incredible day and a trail that tested us in all the right ways. Good company, great views and the quiet satisfaction of having pushed ourselves just enough. Sunday morning, another day of heat, and by 7 o'clock we were on the move again. this time on the shorter 7-kilometer trail. Short, yes, but no less spectacular. If anything, it was more dramatic and more peculiar, as if the land itself had decided to show off. The first stretch took us back to Rory's Rock, retracing part of yesterday's route in reverse. From there, the trail swung southeast towards Botas Cave. The path twisted and dipped, throwing up small challenges. Rock scrambles, narrow ledges and sudden drops. Just enough to keep us alert. The sun-facing cliffs were bone dry, bleached by decades of heat, but the shaded rock faces were thick with ferns and moss, green and glistening with hidden moisture. Sandstone, when left alone, becomes a sculptor of its own kind. The wind and rain carve it into impossible forms, some smooth and honeycombed, others jagged and crumbling. Botas Cave was an immense overhang, deep enough to be a refuge. The story goes that P.W. Botas' mother once hid here during the Boer War to avoid the British. The cave bore signs of construction, crude concrete bunk ledges and the beginnings of an ablution block. Someone is trying to civilize it, but the cave seems unimpressed. We press on, the trail winding toward the far side of the valley, where the landscape shifts dramatically. The sun-baked shrub gives way to something lusher, greener, a quiet reminder of how fickle nature can be. As we move, glimpses of Botas Cave appear, each new vantage point offering a different perspective, as though the cave itself is slowly revealing its secrets. Then, scattered plastic bottles and a weathered sign mark the entrance to a place called Wonderland. The name, for once, was not an exaggeration. An overhang shaded the path, trapping cool air and dampness. It felt like stepping into another world, a damp, hushed corridor beneath the cliffs. The rock face was coated in moss so thick it looked like upholstery, 10-12 centimeters deep in places. Tiny waterfalls seeped from the stone, trickling down in silver threads. The ground was spongy with moisture, pocked with animal tracks. Porcupine, aardvark, and something else with long clawed toes. And then the land gave us a gift. Below in the valley, a line of blue wildebeest moved across the open plain. A dozen at first, then another dozen, their dark bodies rippling over the earth in an unhurried migration. Then a third herd appeared. The trickle became a flood, more than 100 animals moving together, the adults a deep charcoal, the juveniles light brown. The scene was staggering, something out of a nature documentary, except we were standing in the middle of it. For a moment, none of us spoke. "Well," somebody finally said, "I guess I don't need to go to Tanzania anymore." On we went, climbing through a rock face section known as the wall, a ladder of wooden rungs bolted into the stone. At this point, obstacles like these barely registered. We had long stopped questioning the logic of hiking. Pools of water lay in the potholes, tadpoles squirming in the shallows, soon to become red toads. The last part of the trail offered a sweeping view of the lodge, with the pond glinting in the sun. A final steep descent, then an easy walk across sandy grassland. By midday, we were back at camp. Boots dust-covered, skin sunburned, limbs aching in that deeply satisfying way that only comes from good exertion. And that was Holhoek. A weekend spent climbing, scrambling and wandering through a place that felt, at times, like the edge of the world. The Free State had delivered once again. Heat, rock, sky and the quiet companionship of people who understood the simple pleasure of walking towards the horizon just to see what lay beyond.
Well, my heart knows me better than I know myself, so I'm gonna let it do all the talking. Came across a place in the middle of nowhere with a big black horse and a cherry tree.